All right, welcome back to the Verified Athletics Podcast. We got a special doubleheader today, so we're going to jump right into it. First, we're going to check back in with Dylan Mabin, cornerback for the Oakland Raiders. He is in camp and getting after it. He's got his first preseason game coming up this weekend. They're showing him and his teammates on Hard Knocks on HBO. And after that, we'll check in with our guest for today, who is Grant Parr. He is a sports psychologist and author of Next One Up, and you guys will really love that too. So this is going to be a great episode. Here we go. All right, everyone, we got Dylan Mabin back on the podcast. What's up, Dylan?
Not much. Just glad to be back.
So you're how long have you been at camp now? Now you guys are with the Raiders, and how many practices have you had so far? How long have you been sitting there?
I've been here since about July 22nd, 23rd. The rookies were here about 3 days earlier, so we've gotten a few more practices. But we're a little over a week and a half or so in. So we've gotten about six or seven practices in so far.
How many rookies do you guys have?
I think about 16 to 20 because they drafted, I think, six or seven, and then we had about 10 or 11 undrafted free agents, so around there.
Okay, and so is it possible to have like a real practice with just the 16 or 17 you guys, or they just like make it
Oh no,
work?
it wasn't like a real like practice. Like we didn't go 11 on 11 type stuff, but we did like individual and we had like walkthrough periods and things like that. No competitive periods at that point. But
So it's mostly just focused on learning the playbook, basically.
yeah, that and then we did have like individual periods that were full speed, just getting like technique things down, but nothing 11 on 11 or 7 on 7 or nothing like that.
You get to do some one-on-ones though.
Once the veterans got here, we started doing one-on-ones.
Gotcha. So you didn't do that just like with the other receivers and the quarterbacks or anything like that.
No, no, no.
Are there any rookie quarterbacks on the team?
Nope. It's just the three vets.
Okay. So so I actually I didn't realize this last time we talked, but they're filming Hard Knocks there for the Raiders this year.
Yeah, they are. They
What
are.
what's that like?
It's definitely different because they're pretty much everywhere. They mic different people up. Like I'm actually gonna be mic'd up tomorrow. I just found out. So I mean, they're micing everybody up, and they're in meetings, and you're getting a haircut. They're there. They're trying to get everything. So it's just been a little different. But you just try to act like they're not even there. To be honest.
Is that easy to do?
For some people it is. For some people it isn't. I've always been good at tuning outside things out, so it's not that hard for me. But I could see how it could be a distraction to some people.
Yeah, so when they're out recording, do they like sit you down and like have you do like little conversations and interview you, or is it really just trying to capture the moment?
So at least from my experience, it's just been about capturing the moment. I'm sure they do that with probably some of the higher up people on our team, but just as from what I've seen, it's been more so just capture the moment, raw, uncut footage type things.
And does like the team have anything that they're trying to hold back or trying to make sure, like, do they give you guys any sort of talk about how to handle yourselves around the camera or what you guys can and can't say? I mean, I imagine you guys aren't really into game planning yet, but you guys are putting in schemes and you guys are like showing a lot of things. Like, are they worried about that? Are they the coaches like are they paranoid about any of that stuff?
No, I know our defensive coordinator. He was with the Bengals. He said he's been through this whole Hard Knocks experience. And I mean, they do videotape everything, but they're not going to put anything like specific out there. So they're not too worried about that. We never had an official talk about, you can say this, can't say that. They really just said, just be yourself and just don't make us look bad, basically.
I bet it's like be yourself, except for like this person. You should act like someone else. Act like Dylan.
Yeah, I'm sure for some people they probably had a specific talk, but not with me.
Yeah, so six or seven practices you said are in the books. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you playing?
I feel a lot better than I did in the OTA period. The playbook is really starting to come together. The game it's still fast, but it's starting to slow down. And I feel a lot like I'm gaining confidence as we continue to get through these practices. I hope that just carries into the preseason.
Do you get to take a lot of snaps, or is it kind of like you get a snap here or there, like a freshman on a college football team?
It's definitely I definitely do get less reps than, the starters and things like that. But, they do a good job of delegating the reps, better than I thought at least. I get a solid amount of reps every day, enough to, so they can evaluate me. So that's really all I can ask for.
So I know in college it's like ones versus ones and then twos versus twos and then like a couple of snaps, threes versus threes or something like that, and then you have to divvy up the reps. Are you running with a unit? Is that how it works? I imagine with the NFL it's a little trickier, but I'm not really sure how it works. What's the story there?
As far as the defense, I mean, we do have like set starters, but I mean, once you get farther down the line, it's pretty much like on a rotation basis. And as far as going against like the offense, they actually rotate every play. So you're going against a different group of receivers or running backs, every single play. So one play I could be matched up against a rookie, the next I could be matched up against like a Tyrell Williams or Antonio Brown. So I kind of like that.
Yeah, is it noticeable the difference or does it just feel different when you're lining up?
As far as like the receivers I'm going against.
Yeah, like when you're up against like, veterans that like all pro type guys that have just been around for a long time and have torched the NFL, versus guys that are pretty new that probably feel in a similar situation as you are, just getting the hang of it.
There are definitely differences. Everybody at this level is, athletically gifted. So it's not even as much as the speed. It's just more so like savvy techniques that these vets do that like I don't even notice, like things with their hips or setting up their routes, things like that I'm starting to pick up on now. But originally I was ignorant to it, and they're really starting to open my eyes to that, like the veterans. And I mean the rookies are doing it too. They're starting to learn too. So everybody's getting better.
And is there any experience that feels like someone takes you under their wing? Like there's a whole group of defensive backs I'm sure that you're in meetings rooms with and stuff like that. Do you end up like bonding with some of the older guys, and or is it? I've talked to other guys before, and it hasn't really sounded like that's how it works. But I'm curious what your experience has been.
I have heard those stories about, veterans kind of leaving the rookies out to dry, but I can honestly say with our defensive back room, everybody's been helpful and accepting, and there hasn't been any type of like hazing or nothing like that to the point where I would feel uncomfortable. And they do a good job of helping you when you have a question or taking you under their wing. I can't even just name one person because, it's pretty much everybody that's really offering their help and guidance.
And then last time we talked, it sounded like special teams was going to be a big deal for you in your effort to make the team and get on the field. Any sense of how that's going?
I think it's going good. The coach, he's been telling me I've been doing well lately. Um, at least for me, I know that's one of the most important parts of practice, just because the fact that I am a rookie, so I'm going to get less reps when it comes to like team periods and 7-on-7. I know I'm going to get the reps in the special teams drills, so I got to go 110%, give everything I got because I'm going to have a little extra energy. So use that to my advantage. But, so far, I think it's been going good.
And so, what positions are you playing on all the different special teams, or where do they have you lining up?
I mean, they got me at gunner, the corner that guards the gunner, kickoff return, and like the front line type thing. So I'm pretty much trying to go anywhere I can, to be honest.
They don't have you quite on the field goal unit yet, though.
No, no, if they ask me to, I'll go out there, but I don't think they'll need me for that.
Yeah, they'll just line you back up there. Last one there, snap the football, and you just got to kick it, get it through the uprights,
Right.
right?
I could do it. I'm telling you.
Do they do ever do it like we do in college where they end practice with like the kicker going for like a 55 or a 60-yard field goal, and if they make it, everyone celebrates and like they get something off? Do they do shit like that in the pros?
Um, they don't, as far as like field goals, they haven't yet. I know one thing during when the rookie camp was here, our center was having some trouble. Apparently, he was having some trouble like getting the snap down. And I remember coach brought us all up at the end of practice. He said, "All right, he's got to get like 5 perfect snaps in a row, or we're starting the whole practice over." So everybody was all hype and screaming and all that. So it. Kind of reminded me of college a little bit in that aspect.
So far, what feels different between this camp and just like a normal college camp that you've been in for the last 4 years?
Um, Believe it or not, the meetings. I know in college we had a lot of meetings, but this is on a completely different level. I mean, we're having like 4 meetings a day type things, and I thought in college we had a lot of meetings, but just nothing like this. And they're intense meetings too. Like you can't be drifting off or just daydreaming. Like you got to be in tune and focus.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever made it through an entire camp where there hasn't been one player that's fallen asleep in a meeting. Has that happened yet with the Raiders?
um, I'm not gonna say it's happened, but I'm not gonna say it hasn't happened. Some people do tend to get a little droopy eyed, but
Just one of
sometimes
those
that's how it goes.
just one of those things where their head starts to fall forward, their chin starts to hit their chest, and as
Hmm.
soon as the chin starts to touch the chest, they like snap their head
Snap
back
up.
and get their eyes open. Like I wasn't sleeping. Who was sleeping? One of
Yeah,
those deals.
I try not to let that happen to me.
Just
So I
gotta
can't.
you gotta like talk about performance enhancing drugs. You just gotta take some caffeine right before all your meetings in order to stay awake.
Dude, you got to do something. Sunflower seeds, candy. You got to do something.
Yeah. I feel like you weren't the type to be falling asleep in meetings. So do you
No,
am I just not remembering all that well?
nah. I mean, the only time I think in college would maybe be during a special teams meeting, like here and there. But I would never actually fall asleep. I would just get a little heavy eyed.
Definitely not
But
the
that,
first.
I
Definitely not the first year when I was a special teams coordinator. I'm sure. Probably
nah,
the other
nah,
years, right?
nah. This is the other years. Freshman year, I was trying to get on the field, so I was locked in.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Especially once you become a starter, I feel like it becomes a little bit tougher to take special teams as seriously. Now, some guys they definitely still have that in them, and they want to be as good as they can for every snap that they can. And if you're at a Fordham and you want to play in in the NFL, getting that special teams film can be pretty important for you. So some guys definitely still take it seriously. Where do they put you guys up? Are you guys on a college campus, or what's your setup?
We're actually we stay in a hotel, and it's actually really neat because I don't know, I don't think a lot of NFL teams do it like that because we're in a hotel, and then like the practice facility is like literally right outside the hotel. So and all the meeting rooms are in the hotel. So like right now, like I'm in a meeting room, and my room is literally like 2 flights upstairs. So everything's really close and compact, and I actually really like that setup.
How close are you guys to, is this like the true Oakland Raiders practice facility, or is this just a special spot they got for the summer?
Oh yeah, we're in Napa Valley, so we're like an hour or so out of Oakland. So it's like their own practice facility, but it's not like within Oakland though.
But is it the one that they use during the season, or is it just the one they use during camp?
Oh no, it's just for camp. It's just for camp.
Yeah, because I know most schools, most colleges, or excuse me, most NFL teams go somewhere else for the summer camp, and I feel like a lot of them go. You at least used to go to college campuses, but maybe less so now.
Yeah, I mean, I have noticed that, and I've spoken to a few people that do that. But I mean, I'm thankful to be in a hotel. I mean, I come back to the room and housekeeping got the bed made all nice and fresh towels and all that. So after practice, I just go back to my room and shower. I don't have to even just shower in the locker room. So I'm extremely blessed in that capacity.
Do they don't have you sharing a room with anyone, or are you on your own, or how's that set up?
I have a roommate. I think I forget what the age cutoff. It's like if you have 7 years, if you're 7 years or more, then you get like a single. If you're under that, then you have a roommate.
So that's like being an NFL adult or something like that.
Yeah, it's something like that. So I mean, I expected to have a roommate, so I wasn't like shocked or anything.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine it's like it's probably good just to have the company and like to because otherwise it could maybe feel isolating, depending on your personality, it could be harder to feel connected.
Yeah, it's definitely good. I mean, me and my roommate, Isaiah Johnson, he's like a great guy. So we bonded instantly and connected instantly, and I'm actually glad to really have him. It's always good to have somebody in your corner during this time of year.
So is he a rookie too?
Yeah, he's a rookie corner. He was drafted out of Houston.
Okay. And what round was he drafted in?
I think the fourth. I want to say the fourth.
Nice. So you're like kind of competing against each other or working with each other all on the field, and then you guys get to go out and hang out afterwards. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much, yeah.
Nice. What do you guys do for fun when you guys aren't in meetings or on the field, or like you said, today's your day off?
I know before I came down here, he was up there playing Fortnite. So we just do things. We do Fortnite. Watch TV shows. There's some stores around here. If we get like free time, we go to the store and check out that. So we take advantage of our time.
Cool. Well, We're recording this. It's Monday night. I think tomorrow night, Tuesday, is going to be the first episode of Hard Knocks, but I imagine we won't actually air this podcast until a little bit after it's out. What jersey number should I be looking for out there to spot you?
Look for number 37.
Cool. All right. Well, Dylan, thanks for checking in with us, and we'll do this again in a couple of weeks. And when's your first preseason game?
This upcoming Saturday. So
Nice.
I think it's the 10th.
Nice. Any sense on whether or not you're getting on the field, or is it too early to say?
I mean, the way they're talking, they're saying they're going to take it easy on the starter, so I should definitely get some time, hopefully.
Well, sweet. Well, we'll be watching.
Definitely, I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Talk to you later. All right. Watch Dylan this Saturday, number 37, Oakland Raiders versus the Rams, I think. We'll be rooting for you. Okay. Next up, we have Grant Parr. He is an author. He is a host of a podcast, Game Face Performance. He wrote Next One Up. He's a former college football player, played junior college and at the Division II level. And he's a sports psychologist, and he's got a lot of great insight dealing with all the things that he's dealt with through his life. And he's got a great story and a great message, and I'm sure you guys will love him. So here we go. Okay, we got Grant Parr on the podcast. Grant, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I know you got this really interesting story about how you got to where you are now. You're being a mental performance coach for athletes and writing your new book. So why don't you just take me on your journey a little bit? How'd you end up where you're at today?
I played football for about 13 years as a quarterback, and I played at the D2 level. And going into actually in junior college, I got hit in the hip and played through it. And by my end of my junior year, I ended up getting a compressed fracture in my left hip. And so I was forced to leave the game that I loved, and was pretty upset and frustrated about that, and started not to like the game anymore. And what that did is it slowly started to take me away from my identity as a quarterback, as an athlete, as a competitor. And I spent about 2 decades of dealing with this injury and how it just destroyed my identity and my spirit. And so, long story short, I've had 2 hip replacements on the same hip before I was 40. And when I went through after my first surgery, I ended up getting this bone that was growing in my hip, and it grew 6 inches long and 4 inches wide. And it essentially, after about 6 months of my first surgery, I was put into the state of being called handicapped, because they didn't know how long, they didn't know if this was going to be fixed. There was only less than 1% that this has ever happened to. So I was told that I got to be okay with walking abnormally for the rest of my life, and they don't know if they can fix it. So going through about 4 years of not clipping my toenails, not tying my shoe, there's a lot of my spine was turning in 3 spots because the way I was overcompensating my walk. It was tough. It was very dark. So I ended up a doctor came up to my other doctor and said, "Hey, this is what we need to do. We need to take it out. We need to put some radiation in it, and then hopefully that bone doesn't come back." So long story short, I got prepared for that surgery. I mean, got into meditation, got into breathing work, gratitude work, and then I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, that the moment that I got out of that surgery, I literally said out loud, "I'm back." And when you spend almost 2 decades losing who you are, just being a dark hole, that moment was so special to me. And I would say about 2 weeks after that surgery, I ended up started doing squats, started jogging, and I was like, I got my life back. So at that moment, I literally looked at myself and said, I need to redesign who I am, and I need to do something different. So I actually did some discovery for about a year. And then one day when I was just kind of being open to other opportunities, because I was a sales professional for about 17 years in corporate America, I was sitting there listening to ESPN, and I was listening to Desmond Howard talk about a sports psychologist. I'm like, what is that? What's a sports psychologist, right? So he ended up he's talking more about his experience, and I went home and I just started researching it. I didn't realize that there were so many of them out there, but it was still kind of a new concept and a new field. And within 2 months of that moment, I was enrolled at JFK University, and I was so I got my master's in sports psychology. And ever since then, here I am. This is the reason why I'm here.
Well, that's totally like a turnaround story. I'd love to like learn a little bit more about that dark period. I think it's so relatable for a lot of athletes, and you're probably is like one of the more extreme versions of it. But I think all athletes have that experience where they're out of sports, sometimes due to injury and sometimes because the ball deflates because no one wants them to play anymore. They graduate
Right.
college or they finish high school, and there's no step forward in their athletic career, and they're turning their attention to something else. And I've had guests on this podcast that played in the NFL, and the ball deflates for them too. And eventually, you're just not playing football anymore. And I think most athletes experience some darkness there that you touched on, and I think compounded with that, injuries, in your case, a significant one. Can you a lot of people listening to this podcast are probably not yet in that phase of their life, and that is coming. So like, what was that like? Like, how could you describe that better?
Well, the dark moment was interesting because I was living a kind of a dark, long moment from the moment that I left the game. So the first 15 years or so, I had to deal with just not walking right. Had a hitch in my step. I had people making fun of my walk. Here I am. I'm always the guy. My whole life I've been the guy, been the quarterback, been the leader. Everyone looked up to me. It was a really different space to be in where people are making fun of you because no one ever made fun of me. I mean, I was the quarterback, right? And I always led by example, and I started to deteriorate as I started living my life, and I started to listen to all that stuff. Like I really did. I started to listen like I'm not normal. I'm never going to be what I used to be, and it just started to crumble me. And as dealt with that for about 15 years, and then I went into my first surgery, and then they told me I would probably never walk again straight, never do the things that I would, play basketball, play, flag football, anything. I was like, this sucks. This really sucks. And I started to get into that victim mindset, started to resort into checking out, started to drink, started to smoke marijuana. I started just doing a lot of that because I was like, well, why not? I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect again. And it was like, wow, it was about being perfect, right? And now I teach a lot about it's progress over perfection. And you know what? It takes some people longer to get it. But the moment that I was on rock bottom, like I really was, it was probably about 3 years into that 4-year darkness. My wife was like, she sat me down. She's like, hey, let's go up to the mountain and go snowboarding. And I never snowboard, but I'm looking at her like I can barely walk. Like, and I was frustrated and I was pissed. I'm like, why would you even bring that up? Like, is anytime that you want to talk about sports or being an athlete or the records that I broke or the touchdown that I threw, man, I wasn't having it. Because it wasn't who I was anymore. So she like rocked my world that morning. It was a Saturday morning. And when I got upset and said, how dare you ask me to go to the mountain and be an athlete right now? Because I can't do that. And she's like, listen, are you going to be like when you turn 60, 65 and you're walking up the stairs and you trip and you break your hip? Is that the way that you want to hurt your hip, or do you want to actually go up into that mountain and be the athlete that you are, tap into that athlete and go be an athlete again? And if you hurt it, you're hurting it being an athlete. I'm looking at her going, well, I spent the last 2 decades not being an athlete. Like, but maybe I can be an athlete, maybe I can do it. And it hurt, like it really did. My hip hurt, but I went up there and I did it. I went down there, a couple slopes with her after about 4 hours of, being trained and taking some lessons. And that kind of shook me a little bit. I'm like, you know what, this dark spot, I'll tell you what I learned is that I thought since my left hip was damaged, so was the rest of my body. So I gave up on it. So then when I realized I have another great leg that's strong, torso, my heart, my shoulders, my head, I'm like, I got to start working that. And once I started working everything around it, that's when things started to kind of fall in place.
It sounds like a bit of an identity crisis in a way. It's like you had it set yourself up to be a certain type of person in your mind, and you grew up being that person, and then you're a 20 whatever year old person that is formed in that way. And then when you kind of like pull that rug out from underneath you, and you just don't have that piece in your life anymore. It's almost like you can't just like continue on as the 20 something year old that you are, but just without that one piece. It's almost like you got to like tumble back down and grow right back up again and like learn how to be a different type of adult and like with a new identity. And it's probably like, it probably is not as true as it feels in that moment. Like you probably can become like a very similar person with like a small, difference about you, but it probably just doesn't feel that way. And it's hard to bridge that gap from who you thought you were to who you really could become. And you almost have to dip back down. Is that how it feels?
Yeah, it does. And I know that you and I were talking about this before we were recording, that once I started to realize that I wasn't who I was anymore, that my life became very narrow in the things that I was looking at, the way I was looking at myself, looking at the things that I can accomplish in my life. I was playing a very small game. And as I learned over a couple of decades, is that when I got my body back and I got my mind, I got my heart back and my spirit, I was like, man, I'm gonna go play a big game. And it's the evolution of having like starting that commitment of like, man, I want to do something big, and I want to be in service, and I want to rock my life. And so doing this, being a mental performance coach, having my own podcast, having my own book that I just wrote a couple months ago, I never even thought I could ever do this. Like I never even thought that I would go back to school and get my master's, and to be honest with you, like some of my negative belief systems, I mean, one of them, I'll be vulnerable on your show. One of them was that I for years, I thought I wasn't smart enough. Like I wasn't smart enough. And like stuff would come up, I'm not smart enough. And man, this, playing quarterback is one of the hardest positions in sports, period. And here I am, I played that for 13 years and I've had this little gremlin on my shoulder telling me that I'm not smart enough. And so when I got rid of that, that mindset, man, I've created more space for my life. And I feel like I'm on fire with my career and what I'm doing with people.
Yeah, so that gave me a lot of different questions. I can't skip over it. You thought that you weren't smart enough. What is it that you thought tricked you into feeling that way?
Well, I think it all went back to academics. I was a guy, I was disciplined more than anybody. So I would go to school. I would never cut class. I'd never miss an assignment. But that doesn't mean that my assignments had quality behind it. I was one of those guys that I'd just show up, and I would show up and I know I would pass, but I was okay with getting C's. Right. And then when I got a D, it was like, my bar was so low, it was a C. It was never an A because I never thought I could. And if I did, for whatever reason, it was like a celebration, right? But it was never my goal to get an A. Well, which was really funny when I went back to school at the age of 40 with my master's program. When I first started getting A's for the first time in my life, I was like, it was contagious. I was like, I want this. And when I got a B, like I was pissed. I'd come home and my wife's like, did you get a B? Because like my schedule. I'm like, I did. And she's like, well, so what'd you learn from it? So then I learned from it and let it go, move on. But it was so funny how I shifted, how that was one thing. If I can go back, if I could really believe in myself, really really trust myself, and raise the bar a little bit with my academics, I think that whole am I smart enough? I just lived in that probably when junior high and on. It was kind of like when it developed.
So what was the thing that made you like, I don't know, I don't want to say like maybe not try or not be focused on trying to get the A's and B's. Like you described it as like you have a game and you're trying to win the game, and it seems like that you were able to take that mentality to school the second time around, and you clearly just didn't the first time around. Do you think it was like a lack of being interested? Do you think it was trying to be cool? Do you think it was like your friends just weren't into it, or like your social group, or I don't know. I'm trying to understand. I mean, I got a young child, so I'm trying to understand the differences that cause someone to be like a little bit more focused in school versus one that doesn't. And athletes are, I know a lot of athletes that are basically focused just enough in school in order to get the grades they need to get to play ball, right? But I think most athletes would really benefit from trying a little bit harder, because if they're getting a full scholarship, that the academics, make a huge difference. It opens up a lot of doors. In all regards. So I don't know, what do you think was holding you back? Why don't you think you gave the effort or the focus or the desire to win towards academics when you were in junior high and high school?
it all started when I was young in elementary. I was a resource kid, meaning that there was typically an hour or 2 hours out of, I mean, I don't know, maybe when I was second grade, all the way up to junior high. I would have to leave for about an hour to 2 hours to go into another small room with other kids that had some learning disabilities. I don't know if I really had a learning disability. I think I had more of a confidence issue. But even though I was the tallest kid in my class all the time and I was, outgoing and fun loving, but there was, I think when you start to grow up and you're the kind of the special kid in a way when it comes to academics. And that didn't really affect me as much growing up because I knew that I was a really good athlete. So when I go out and recess or go little league or youth football, I would blow it up. And so that kind of kept my confidence going. But when I started to become more of a football player in junior high, my dad, I think when you asked me the question, like realizing that I'm a resource kid, and then I'm getting better and better and better. And right before I'm going into high school, my dad asked me, he's like, "So where do you want to go to college and play football?" I'm like, USC, baby. That's where I want to go. So, and right above my desk here is a USC helmet right now. And it was just a goal of mine. But he goes, if you want to go there, you have to be top 5% of your class. And when he said that, I was like instantly like, well, I can't do that. Like, I'm a resource kid. And he back then, my dad was so like, talk about mental performance and sports psychology. He was teaching stuff that I didn't even know, like breathing, visualization, right? Self-talk was huge for my dad, like language. If he heard us say stuff, he would correct us in the moment. And he was our coach in baseball and football. He was our president of our Pop Warner League. So he was very involved. But I think when he asked me that question in junior high, that's when I started going, I'm just going to hope, which hope is not a strategy, but I'm going to hope that my athletics are good enough where a team will take a chance on me and kind of push the grades to the side. And that was just like, it's so limiting, right? But it was part of my journey, and I love it that I have it so I can teach people based off that.
Yeah, that it just makes me think that people are capable of what they think they're capable of. It's like if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't kind of expression. And
Totally.
it sounds like you were like the victim of that. Is like you thought you could be good at sports, and then you were good at sports, and you thought you couldn't be good at academics, and then you weren't good at academics, and then you had a mentality shift, and now you're an author of a book, and you run a successful business. It's like that was like probably I doubt that it was like the hip surgery that helped you to cross that line and like made you a lot smarter all of a sudden. It was just like that was always within you, but like the gift of like belief just wasn't in you, at least in that part of your life, and obviously it had a big impact on you.
Totally.
One of the things I wanted to ask is you're from California, is that right?
Yeah, San Francisco.
So you're from San Francisco. You're a high school football player, and tell me like how did the recruiting process go for you? And maybe like for our audience's sake, give me a rough sense of like the year, just because recruiting has probably changed quite a bit since you were going through it.
For sure. I was the second football player in the history of my high school that not only starting, but I was the second sophomore being brought up to varsity. And I started. And so the moment that happened, I remember this, and I kept all my letters just because it was part of my journey. But my first letter was from University of Cal Berkeley. And man, from that moment on, I started getting these letters. They became like addictive because I was getting like my junior year, like I had a really good junior year. I was getting letters like every other day, and I was getting them sent to my school. So again, people seeing UCLA and BYU and Arkansas, even Florida State, like they were seeing these like letters being like delivered to me in the middle of class. And that was motivation, right? But then when you get that, like when you start and you're the first dude that in a while that's like getting all those accolades and getting all this attention, then your focus starts to becoming on this outcome goal, it's scholarship. And I started to, even though I respected the process and loved going through the process, it got to my senior year where when I found out that there was scouts at the game, like as soon as like I told my dad, well, never tell me that there's a scout. I don't want to know if there's scouts at the game, because my focus goes straight to that and not what I need to be doing. And I could see, and there was moments, Nate, where I could see it on the film where I'm walking up to the line of scrimmage and I'm doing it differently to kind of show off, right? To look like I'm in command, right? Like I'm getting into because I love Jim Kelly, he's my favorite quarterback. Like I wanted to walk like him. And if there's a scout there, I wanted them to look at that. Right in that moment, I just took myself out of focus, right? So I would say that so it was a little bit. I put more pressure on myself my senior year, and things didn't work out the way I wanted to as far as D1. But I was lucky that I had an awesome junior college in the neighborhood, if you will, and it was Chabot Junior College. And they just the year before I graduated, they went to the national championship game and lost. So I was walking in and filling in for a quarterback that was incredible, but walking into just a high-powered program.
Okay, so you ended up going to junior college. Was grades a factor there, or was it just that you didn't get the scholarship that you were looking for?
I think it was, well, grades were a little bit of factor, but it wasn't bad grades. But I think if I had really nice grades, it would have been a little bit different for me. Um, but when you're running the wing T offense and you're an option quarterback, which back then I'm 6'3", almost 200 pounds, and I'm only throwing 13, 15 times a game. It's just hard to get picked up when the production is not that high. Now, I was very accurate. I had a fair amount of touchdowns. I didn't have a lot of interceptions, but it was just hard to be seen when you're going against somebody else. There's two other quarterbacks that I was competing against in my league, and they were throwing 22, 33 times a game.
Did you
so they were
resent
getting looked.
did you resent being at a school where you felt like your talents weren't on display for college coaches and that was limiting you?
I'll tell you what, my sophomore year, my dad saw me and he's like, listen, you're special, you have talent, you're going to keep growing into this big quarterback. Now, are you sure you want to stay at California high school? And I'm like, yep, I want to make them good because we spent years not being a good program. And he goes, you have a chance to go to San Ramon Valley High, which was in Danville, which is next to our town. And then you can go to De La Salle, the mighty De La Salle, or you can go to Monte Vista. And those three schools, if you went to any of those schools, like if you're good, you're going to get picked up. I mean, it was just those were high-powered programs. And so I kept on telling my dad, I'm like, nope, I'm staying here. I want to be with my friends, and I want to prove that I can change the culture. And so that moment, there's times where I go back, I'm like, what if, right? But okay, what if? I mean, it doesn't do anything, but things could have changed for me. But you know what? I truly believe that I stuck it out with the dudes with me. We changed it. We actually changed the culture from then on out. There was a couple of years that they were under 500, but now they play De La Salle in the NCS finals almost every year. So I feel good that I stuck it out, but it's personally, I can go back and say what if, and I should have, but if I did do it, I probably would have been to De La Salle or San Ramon High.
Gotcha. And then
Yeah.
you probably had a second recruiting experience then when your JUCO days were done. You're trying to go somewhere as a junior to transfer to a 4-year school. What was that like?
So interestingly enough, my freshman year, I was battling out for the job, and this was with a quarterback that came from Florida, not Florida, University of Florida, but he was All American actually, he was all state. But he was about 3 or 4 years older than I was. So he played JUCO in Florida and then ended up taking a year off or so and then moved out to California. So long story short, the offensive coordinator just liked the fact that he had more experience than I did and liked the way he threw the ball. And, that first game, and you'll read it in my book, I kind of capture that first college game in my book. And I ended up coming in at halftime and just, man, tore it up. And there was some other dynamics that happened. It took a couple games before I actually was named the starter. But after I got started the starting job, we won the following week. My defensive end ends up blocking my pass, and my hand bounced off his hand, and my hand went straight into his helmet, and I shattered my ring finger on my throwing hand. So, and the reason why I tell you the backstory of that, because I was like heading out to have a really good season, and then it ends in the middle of the season. And so the cool thing about my coach, he believed in me. He's like, "Listen, get your finger healed up." And I came back, and he believed in me, and I was a starting quarterback. So I only had like a year and a half of junior college football. But again, I'm running, like, when I say wing tee, we're running the Delaware wing tee. Like, it's like full on, and I loved it. It was a fun offense, play action pass, and 3-step, 1-step. It's just option. I loved it. But there's not a lot of D1 schools that are running the wing tee. So that kind of went against me. But to me, I had a lot of Division II, Division III, a few NAIA schools, and it got down to, like, what was it, Morningside University and Glenville State in, I think, West Virginia. One of them wanted to give me a full ride, wanted to give me a partial, but it was like, I don't know, in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to go to those places. They didn't really like resonate with me, and the programs didn't. So I found myself not having a program, like literally going into the next summer, there was no program, and I'm like, I guess I'm done with football. And then I went to my high school and just to check out my football team and just watch them practice in the summer. And my coach looked at me and he goes, "Why aren't you playing football?" And I'm like, "Well, no one picked me up. No one gave me a scholarship that I really liked." And he goes, if I can call right now and you go to Sonoma State, would you go?" I'm like, "Sure." And it was a D2 school, no scholarship, and it was literally 2 days later, he calls me up and he says, "Can you get there tomorrow?" So I'm like, "Sure." So I had 6 weeks to get ready for the first game. And it was the West Coast offense, which was tough for me to learn in a short amount of time. So that was an interesting experience because I felt so good in junior college, even though I played a year and a half. But things we did as a team and personally was just incredible. And then I find myself not playing, and it was kind of a weird feeling. But then, I took what was available and did my best with it.
Yeah. So then, that's when you get hurt and you end up, like kind of on the shelf and go down like the path of being someone that's like living without football for a little while. And then, to bring you back, you'd mentioned that your wife asked you to go snowboarding one day, which I find to be both like really interesting and also kind of hilarious that is like the thing that like knocks you out of your like malaise or whatever.
Right.
Um, do you think that like something had turned in you where you were just more open to hearing something like that and that's why it was the thing that switched? Or do you think that like just no one was pushing you to do anything, and then when someone finally did, it just that's all it was going to take at any point, or were you just more ready for it?
No, I agree with you. I think no one really stepped up and rattled my cage. No one held me accountable because they saw the pain. Like I had so many people come up to me and say, painful it is to watch you walk. I'm like, yeah, yeah, you should feel the pain. And I'll tell you what, like when you're in sales, which is a very image based, you know, industry or role, when you're going to meet somebody for the first time, no matter how good you look, your hair's done, your ties, you have a nice tie and suit and all that. When you're walking like the ogre from Notre Dame, your first impression is like, whoa, who's this dude? And I instantly could feel that energy and instantly would make up like, oh, they think I'm damaged. And so I'd have to overcompensate with my personality. And so I had to deal with a lot of that. But I think it was literally my wife. She just she shook me, and that's what it took. And man, and I tell the story all the time, man. And my wife is like, she's a stud. Like she works her butt off to have the body she does and take care of her body. Recovery is huge for her. And so I don't know, when someone is so dedicated for their own body and then they check you, I used her as an inspiration, motivation, and was like, and plus I'm like, I'm her husband. Like I got to show up, and I don't want to show down. I want to show up. So yeah, got to get shaken up sometimes.
So like it doesn't surprise me then with like it seems like you've had a lifelong battle with mental performance in a lot of ways. It seemed like that that you were always the limiting thing on your success has always been like the mentality. And so it doesn't surprise me that one day you wake up, you recognize that, and then you have an approach that makes you less susceptible to all the problems that had plagued you, in various forms throughout your entire life. And then as soon as you recognize that, I imagine that's when the light switch turns on and you say, there's got to be a million other people out there walking around just like me with this mental block. And then you say, I got to help them. Is that basically right?
Pretty much. It pretty much. And it's so funny, like, absolutely. But when I went through this whole scenario, I was like, you know what? I have a story here and I want to share it. And it's so funny. I ask people, I'm like, hey, what do you think about me? Like writing a book about this, or just kind of doing keynote speaking on this topic. And people are like, no, dude, don't do that. Don't do that. Hey, what do you think about me writing a book about the next one up mindset? No, 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 don't do that. Hey, what do you think about me like changing my occupation like at the age of 40? Nah, you probably don't want to do that. Like so many people are telling me, and then I got to a point where I'm like, man, my negative self-talk is not only I'm allowing these people, I'm in the effect of all these people, but I'm letting these people live my life. Like screw that, man. So it was so funny. Like a lot of people that were very important people were telling me these things, and I trust them. But now I was like, no, man, I need to trust myself. And all the things that people are telling me not to do, and I did it, man, my life has been flourishing. So it's kind of been a nice thing that, when we talk about negative self-talk, man, that was my life for 2 decades. And I'll tell you what, I lost my confidence as a public speaker. And I'll tell you what I do now every time I speak. Like even before I even got on this show with you, I say 3 things all the time. I say, they want to hear me, right? I get to do this, and tap into your joy. And those 3 things, I'm controlling the controllables. I'm focusing on all positive stuff, and there's nothing. I'm not allowing any kind of self-doubt or nerves, nothing. I'm jacked and I'm like locked in. So I've had to learn that kind of self-talk and develop those mantras, over time, but due to the last couple of decades. So there's definitely opportunity out of a crisis for sure.
See, I have the opposite problem. I'm delusional. I think everyone wants to hear me always. That nothing could stop me, and I think I run face first into a lot of things as a result. So it could go the other way too. But yeah. So I guess like writing a book just seems like such a daunting task. How do you like pick up the pen for the first time or turn on the computer for the first time and say, I am going to start writing words? Like, I feel like that has got to be the hardest part, is like literally like starting a book with nothing on the piece of paper. So like, how do you make that transition? What motivated you?
It's a great question because I had so much there's so much thought, so much like data and knowledge in my head that like I wanted to get it all out and throw it up on the paper or papers. And that was struggle because I'm like, no, it was about being perfect, right? So I'm like, I've never written a book. And so like, how do I know what's perfect? Just after a while, I think the first couple months, it was like kind of a slow process for me just to go, okay, this is going to be daunting. Embrace the journey, embrace the process, and just go. Just go. Just let it all out. It's not going to be perfect. Someone else is going to come up on top over me and look at this, and they're going to make it better and guide me. So, which I did. I had a guy that helped me, which was awesome. But to tell you the truth, the book took a couple of years, but I was writing it and taking notes for about 4 or 5 years. And when I went to get my master's in sports psychology, instead of doing a thesis, they said you can do a thesis or a special project. So I'm like, what's a special project? And they're like, it could be anything. So I was like, oh, maybe I could start writing my book, like, right? So then I talked to my professor, and he goes, I think, if you're going to really challenge yourself to write a book in 3 or 4 months, because that's all we had when we made the decision, I think you're going to stress yourself out. And he goes, but I want you to keep writing that book, though. Keep writing it, but think of something else. And I was like, okay. So then I thought of the podcast. So my podcast came out of my special project from my grad program. But it was at that moment when I started to write the book. And it was hard at first. But then when you start getting your juices going, and you start to allow yourself to be open to just kind of researching the idea and other subjects of people who got prepared for the moment and people who didn't, was kind of was a fun journey for me.
Yeah. So what does next one up mean? Like where's that coming from?
Well, it comes from the next man up, right? So when you think of, and again, I've pulled tons tons of different stories and subjects throughout the history of sports, in all sports, of people that were either second string or sitting on the bench, or just out of nowhere their number was called and they stepped up and they relished in the moment. And when you think of guys like Nick Foles, I mean, look at him. He was the man, not the man, and then now he's the man. But truly, when he came in the year that Carson Wentz went down, he came in towards the end of that year, and he was sitting on the bench for most of the year. Not only does he take him to the Super Bowl, but he ends up getting MVP, and then he gets the richest backup quarterback contract, $20 million, to sit on the bench the following year, and he almost did it again. So when you look at people like that, I was so interested in athletes that, what do they do in the dark? What are they doing at practice? What are they doing in the film room to get ready for that moment? Look at Tua when he was a true freshman at Alabama. Like, how does anybody as a true freshman never play a snap all season long, and then they get put in the biggest game of their lives at halftime when they're down 3 or 4 touchdowns and comes back and wins it? I don't know about you. I mean, I understand that he's talented, but mentally there's something that he was doing. So that actually was the reason why I wrote the book, because I was so interested in it. And, as a coach and as an athlete and a professional in the workplace, I just saw so many people not get prepared for the moment, right? I mean, I saw this in corporate America so many times where someone's sitting in their office and someone, like, out of nowhere, their boss comes up to them and says, "Hey, the area VP's in town today and wants to talk to you." And I've seen so many, they freak out. Like, why do they want to talk to me? Did I do something wrong? Are my numbers down? And they start freaking out instead of going, right on. I get to talk to the the area vice president, and get excited for that. And if there's something wrong, it's okay, man, get the feedback from it, right? So, but we get plugged into the emotional side. And I think when our number's called and we're not ready and prepared, I think that's where damage can happen. And that's why I always say, preparation is your separation. So the more you're prepared for that moment, man, you're going to thrive.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that Tom Brady was the next man up. He was. I think the Patriots weren't even very good, and
Right.
And they were like maybe a few games into the year, and they had a quarterback that had been a great quarterback in the NFL for a long time, Drew Bledsoe, and he went down with an injury. And I'm pretty sure everyone at that moment said, they're done. This team is done. I'm pretty sure that also the year before, Kurt Warner was the same story, where like their starting quarterback went down in preseason, and like literally they didn't have a single quarterback on the roster that had ever taken a snap in the NFL. And I think that they had like not won a game, or maybe only won one game the year before. And in both cases, like they both won Super Bowls, and in Tom Brady's case, probably like the greatest quarterback in NFL history.
Right.
And so, and that expression, next man up, I've been on coaching staffs and with football teams where like literally every single day, the head coach would harp on the idea of the next man up, and that it's the job of the person that's backing someone else up to be as good or better than them in the case that they have the opportunity. And that's what like their job is. And I think that like you said, that probably almost anyone that is like seeking the help, and or maybe that's not true, but like I would say a lot of people that are seeking the help of a mental performance coach or reading like a book to help them to up their game are probably the people that could be the next man up. They're not already in the spot of being the man. And
Totally.
and so understanding the best mentality to be in that position to ultimately achieve all the things that you're looking for is the right mentality. So that makes total sense to me.
Totally. To be honest with you, I think being the backup in any sport, in a team sport, is probably one of the hardest things, the hardest role, but the most crucial role in the team. We all need first stringers for sure. But guess what? What if you're that person that is backing up Tom Brady, that's backing up Le'Veon Bell, right? If the game is, if you're winning and Le'Veon Bell he's ripping off 200 yards and he ends up getting hurt and he's out for the next couple of games, you have to jump into the rhythm of the game, the rhythm of the season. And I always say like the image of it, it's like jumping into a car going 70 miles an hour, jump through the window of it. I mean, if you're not prepared to see yourself being successful, getting into your breath, having good self-talk, you might not be ready for that moment, because it's so hard to jump into the rhythm of that game or the season if someone goes down.
Yeah, so you've touched on like a couple of things like very briefly, but if you're a high school athlete or a college athlete, and you're trying to find a way to up your game to be a little bit better. I'm sure all these things can be much more beneficial at a very individual level. But what are some good general tips and advice that you think a vast majority of athletes are just not doing right, that could be simple changes that can make a big impact?
You know, there's one that comes to mind just because it's the basis of all mental skills training. It's the basis of mindfulness training, and that's your breath. There are so many people that just don't have a relationship with their breath. And it's so easy for me to tell you right now, like, hey, you got to have a relationship with your breath, because you and I right now are breathing, but we're not consciously breathing. We're not dropping into our chaotic lives or the moment that's really chaotic on the field and really dropping in, like getting right now in the here and now. Now, how do you do that? If you know, for your listeners, start literally 3 to 5 to 7 times a day. Drop in for 3 to 5 seconds. That's it. Like, stop everything, take a couple of deep breaths, and then let it go. And keep doing that throughout the day, because when it's third down and 2, or when your coach is yelling at you because you just had a mistake or you threw a pick six, whatever it is, you've got to get back into the here and now. If you want to get refocused and you want to let go of that emotional bag of shit that happens a lot when people just they don't know how to deal with mistakes or failures, you got to start with your breath. And I think other things, when you accomplish or accompany breath, it's with visualization and positive self-talk. Those 3 things are within your control. And if you can actually start focusing on it at a young age, you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I always use the expression, it's probably not as good as focus on your breath, but to stop the slide, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like I always try to create, like, there's like this imagery that that I always think of as someone that's like trying to like hike up a slippery or muddy hill, right? And it can often feel like that when things aren't going your way in the game, and like one thing goes wrong and then another thing goes wrong, and all of a sudden it feels like you're just like going down the hill and there's no way to stop it. And like the mental imagery that I always think of is like, you have to like plant your foot in the ground, you have to like drive it in there, and you have to stop the slide, and then you can like focus back on hiking back up. And probably the focusing on your breath is like the literal way to accomplish that in some ways. I've never heard a coaching staff or a coach or a player think of it in those terms. If you have any experience with working with athletes that literally use that technique, and any stories that you think might be interesting to our audience about that.
Tons. When you think about sports in general, the hardest thing, I think, the hardest thing for an athlete is when your game is going the other way, when you're making a lot of mistakes, you feel like a failure, all these things that are happening. I call it the shift. How do you shift from all these mistakes into your most confident self in the moment? That's the hardest thing, especially when there's all this pressure and you have scouts and your girlfriend and your parents and the faculty and your teammates. All this stuff is like adding up, and like you're not doing well. So how do you actually get back into your confidence, right? So there's a few things. I have a process called BVT, and I talked about it just a little bit ago. And it's breathe, visualize, and talk, self-talk. Talk yourself back into the situation. So that's BVT. Also, when we talk about confidence, right? When we make that shift, when we need to, it's going to be really hard in the moment when you're like dealing with all this pressure. Well, how do we get back into our confidence? A lot of us think that confidence is a feeling, and I'm not going to deny that. Like, we all, we know what it's like to feel confident, but how do you get to that point to feel confident? Well, it's called acting. You got to act into your confidence. So how do you act? Well, get into your breath. That's one action. The other action is body language. Throw your shoulders back, put your head up high, right? And then another action is self-talk. Tell yourself, like, literally get some either motivational or instructional self-talk to get you back into the moment. Guess what, dude? You're right there. You are in the moment, in control. You got back into control. And there's another mindset that I teach. It's called win. I think you're familiar with what's important now. So that's another thing that can get you back into your most confident self when things are going the other way. If you can tell yourself when you're feeling chaotic and emotional, what's important now, and you act on it, that's winning.
Yeah, so like all these techniques, they all make sense to me. They seem like no-brainers as like simple adds to someone's life in order to be more successful, be more focused, and overcome mental blocks that we talked about, like the kind of things that plagued you for a
Yeah,
long time.
for sure.
Um, is there any like scientific study, research evidence that like can support some of these things, or can call out the ones that might seem like, the ones that maybe you aren't mentioning that might be bullshit, that like really don't have any real basis to them? Are there
Right.
like, like a lot of the stuff, I think to some athletes and some like hard-nosed football types like sounds a little woo-woo. And
Yeah,
like I don't self-talk, I just rub dirt on it kind of mentality. And so
totally.
like, I don't know, in order to put a little confidence behind some of these things, are you familiar with anyone that does research on this kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially the three things that I'm focused on is breath, visualization, and self-talk. There's so much research on breath, on how it actually, if you get into your breath, how you can slow your respiratory system, you can slow down the blood flow. You can, when you do that, right, when you get into your breath, and there's so much research on it. What I always say is that when you get into your breath, you have your breath, that means you have your mind. And when you have your mind, you have your body. And if you can get into that quick, get into your breath, boom, you get your mind, your body real quick. There's all science on how that actually works, that whole process, because your breath. Like literally when you do a deep breath, guess what happens just now? There's a part of my brain that just lit up. Like they put it under an X-ray and they show the like how much energy that the breath does, especially with the brain, right? So to give you another example of research, when you think of visualization, they have proved that your brain, this is why visualization is so powerful. It's proven that your brain doesn't know the difference from a physical rep from a mental rep. So if you're a second stringer and you're only getting a few different reps throughout the practice, it is your job to learn how to visualize. Because if you're only getting 10 shots in practice, right? You can really increase your shots in your head by 30 shots, 50 shots if you really want to do, because again, your brain doesn't know the difference. Like, how awesome is that? Like, I could literally get more reps in by just dropping into my mind and controlling that image. So there's research on that for sure that's proven to build confidence in the body, and proven that you can get into zone a little bit quicker due to visualization.
Yeah, and some real practical advice for athletes that are, especially football players that are watching film. I think a lot of athletes, when they watch film, are watching it like they would watch on the TV. They're watching a game, but like literally look at the thing that you're supposed to be looking at when you're on the field, right? So if you're a corner, if you're supposed to be looking at the wide receiver, look at the wide receiver. If you're a guard and you're supposed to be looking at the defensive tackle and reading, whether or not he, moves across your face, and then like that means you get your eyes up to the linebacker or whatever it is, put yourself in the position of being running one of your plays, and look at the thing that you're supposed to look at, because that reaction to it, and focus yourself to like work through your progression of your reaction to it. I'm sure this is the type of thing a quarterback almost probably always does when they're watching film, but I
Right.
doubt I doubt a lot of other athletes are. And when you do, you prepare yourself much better for the game. You're much more likely to react the way that you want to and your coaches want you to.
For sure. I think also when you're looking at film, there's so many things you can get from film. If you're going to be playing against a team, whether if it's at home or in their stadium, and you've played there before, or you have a chance just to look on film what that environment looks like, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to recreate what the real life image in your mind enough times you're going to do, to visualize it, so that when you're actually in that environment and you're actually doing the things that you've seen your mind allowed you to see, your body just reacts. It's called training the unconscious mind. So not only do you not want to focus on what you look like and how your body's going to move, but you have to visualize yourself in the environment, because your body is actually literally is stimulated, all your five senses when you're playing football, your vision, your taste, your smell, right? Your touch, your hearing, all that's being activated. Now, typically, we're just focusing on our vision and our touch and maybe auditory, your ears, probably all three of them. But that's what you want to do, is you want to recreate that whole scene in your mind. And the more you can do that, your body's going to feel more comfortable when it's in that environment.
Well, Grant, that's such good advice. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me and my audience. And Really appreciate it. I want to give the people in our audience a chance to learn more about you and find out about your book. So where should they go to get all that information?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can also visit my site, gamefaceperformance.com, and buy my book there. If you want to follow me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, my handle is GFP Mindset. LinkedIn, you can find me as Grant Parr. Facebook, you can find me as Grant Parr and Game Face Performance. And if you're interested to check out my podcast, you can check it out, 90% Mental, on pretty much any podcast platform out there.
Great, Grant. That's amazing. Can't wait to see all the fun things and interesting content that you create here on out.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, Grant. Wow. What a powerful story to go from kind of the depths of not being sure if you'll be able to walk again to overcoming adversity and just turning your mental approach around in a way that allows you to just do the thing that you weren't thinking that you were capable of before, and opening new doors, and going from that to getting a degree in sports psychology and writing a book and starting a podcast and becoming a keynote speaker. I mean, Grant has come a long way from where he was, and I think it's inspirational. So thank you, Grant, for coming on and sharing that with our audience. And before we go, I want to remind our athletes to sign up for a profile if you haven't already at the Verified Athletics watch list, and also to fill out the College Selector. It is a free tool that helps you to identify the right schools for you to be looking at in the recruiting process. Until next time, take care, guys. Bye.